James Garner was known as Hollywood's nice guy, a man whose charm and honesty carried him through decades in the industry. But behind that easy smile, there was a truth he kept guarded for years: his troubled experience with Steve McQueen. Their paths crossed during one of the most iconic films of the 1960s, yet what happened off camera was far from heroic. Only later in life did Garner reveal just how difficult McQueen could be, and his words were as brutal as they were unforgettable. The making of a gentleman actor. James Scott Bumgarner, later known to the world as James Garner, was born on April 7, 1928, in Norman, Oklahoma. His childhood was far from idyllic. The Great Depression cast a long shadow, and tragedy struck early when his mother died in 1933 during a botched abortion. Garner was only 5 years old, left to face a cruel and unstable home life. His father struggled to keep the family together, eventually turning to alcohol after his hardware store burned down. Things worsened when he remarried. Garner's stepmother, Wilma, treated him with hostility, subjecting him to physical abuse and even humiliating him by dressing him in women's clothing. By the age of 14, James had reached his breaking point. In a violent confrontation, he struck back in self-defense, and only his father's sudden intervention stopped him from crossing a line that could never have been undone. Not long after, his father abandoned the family altogether, leaving James and his brothers to fend for themselves. Despite this chaotic upbringing, Garner's resilience kept him moving forward. He worked odd jobs, gas station attendant, carpet layer, even modeling underwear, to survive. His brief stint in the Merchant Marines ended quickly due to chronic seasickness, but in 1950, the U.S. Army drafted him into the Korean War. Just 2 days after arriving, he was wounded by shrapnel, and months later he was hit again by friendly fire. These injuries earned him 2 Purple Hearts, though Garner rarely spoke about his wartime service, downplaying his bravery as if it were nothing at all. There was even a strange twist of fate during his deployment. He had developed an intense aversion to garlic, and on one occasion, that very dislike saved his life. A meal was poisoned, but Garner refused to eat it because it smelled of garlic. Another night on guard duty, the faint scent of garlic in the air alerted him that enemy soldiers were close by. His warning saved his unit from a likely ambush. Returning from war, Garner's path to Hollywood wasn't obvious. A chance meeting with Paul Gregory, who became his talent agent, changed everything. Gregory secured him small roles, including a non-speaking part in the Kane Mutiny Court-Martial. From there, Garner began climbing the ladder, gaining the attention of casting directors and producers. His big break came in 1957 when he was cast as Brett Maverick in the Western series Maverick. The show was a gamble against powerhouse programs like The Ed Sullivan Show, but Garner's sly wit and natural charisma transformed it into a runaway success. He became a household name almost overnight. But his integrity and sharp sense of justice soon put him on a collision course with Hollywood's studio system, a fight that would reveal just how unwilling he was to let powerful executives dictate his fate. Leaving Maverick and fighting the system. By 1960, James Garner was not just the star of Maverick, he was the show's lifeblood. His portrayal of Brett Maverick, the quick-witted gambler with a crooked smile, had turned the series into one of television's most beloved westerns. But Hollywood in those years was an unforgiving machine. When a writer's strike brought production to a halt, Warner Brothers saw an opportunity to cut costs at Garner's expense. Despite his rising stardom, he was making just $1,250 a week, and the studio suddenly declared there was no work for him. Garner saw it differently. His contract guaranteed payment whether scripts were available or not, and he believed the studio was exploiting the strike as an excuse to cheat him out of what he had earned. Most actors would have backed down, fearful of being blacklisted in an industry that thrived on intimidation. But Garner was not like most actors. Drawing on the stubborn resilience that had carried him through his childhood and the war, He sued Warner Brothers for breach of contract. It was a daring move that stunned Hollywood. Stars simply did not take on the studios in open court. Yet Garner pressed forward, and against the odds, he won. The victory established him not only as a star, but as a man unwilling to bow to corporate power. Warner Brothers tried to lure him back with promises of more money and new opportunities, but the damage had been done. Garner walked away, disillusioned with the studio system and determined to carve his own path. For Warner Brothers, the loss was devastating. They scrambled to replace him, even introducing new Maverick cousins, played by Roger Moore and Robert Colbert. But audiences weren't fooled. The magic of Maverick had always been Garner, and without him, the show's charm quickly faded. Although stepping away from a hit series could have been career suicide, Garner refused to look back. He knew he was capable of more, and he would prove it on the big screen. That chance came in 1963 with a war film that would become one of the most celebrated ensemble pictures of its era, The Great Escape. And it was there, behind the walls of a fictional German prison camp, that James Garner would meet Steve McQueen and step into a rivalry that would haunt him for the rest of his career. The rivalry on The Great Escape. When The Great Escape premiered at London's Leicester Square Odeon on June 20th, 1963, it was hailed as a triumph of ensemble storytelling. With a star-studded cast that included Richard Attenborough, Charles Bronson, Donald Pleasance, James Garner, and Steve McQueen, it became one of the most enduring war films of its era. But behind the scenes, the production was marked by tension, especially between Garner and McQueen. At the time, Steve McQueen was rising fast, but he wasn't yet the highest-paid star on the set. Garner received $150,000 for his role as Bob Hendley, while McQueen earned $87,500 for playing Virgil Hiltz, the rebellious Cooler King. That pay gap did not sit well with McQueen, who was already known for his ego-driven demands. He had clashed with Yul Brynner during The Magnificent Seven, and his difficult behavior followed him onto the German prison camp set. McQueen often isolated himself from the cast, staying at a private chalet and arriving to work each day in a studio-hired Rolls-Royce. He complained bitterly about his character, arguing that Hiltz wasn't heroic enough and that the scripted scenes made him look foolish. At one point, he threatened to walk off the production entirely. Director John Sturges even considered rewriting the film to make Garner the central character instead. Garner, ever the steady hand, sat down with McQueen to find out what the problem really was. McQueen admitted that he didn't like being overshadowed and wanted his character to shine. To pacify him, Sturges restructured the script, adding motorcycle stunts and reframing Hiltz as the daring scout who risked capture to bring back vital intelligence. It was a compromise that worked for the film, but exposed McQueen's insecurities. The irony was that McQueen couldn't even complete the movie's most iconic stunt. The legendary barbed wire motorcycle jump was attempted, but failed. He crashed during rehearsals. It was his friend Bud Ekins who ultimately performed the leap, riding a 1962 Triumph Thunderbird disguised to look like a wartime machine. Audiences cheered, unaware that the most famous scene in McQueen's career wasn't even his. Garner would later recall these battles with a mixture of candor and regret. To him, McQueen wasn't a true actor, but a carefully packaged star, a man who carried the same macho persona from role to role. As Garner once put it, "That's the kiss of death as far as I'm concerned." Those words revealed a wound that had lingered for decades, even as the two men remained uneasy friends. Garner's brutal honesty about McQueen. James Garner was not a man who often spoke ill of others. Known across Hollywood as easygoing, kind, and professional, he preferred to let his work speak for itself. But when it came to Steve McQueen, his patience had limits. Decades after The Great Escape, in his 2011 memoir, The Garner Files, he finally revealed what he had thought all along. His words shocked fans because they were as blunt as they were damning. Like Marlon Brando, he could be a pain in the ass on set, Garner wrote. Unlike Brando, he wasn't an actor. He was a movie star, a poser who cultivated the image of a macho man. He had a persona he brought to every role and people loved it. But you could always see him acting. That's the kiss of death as far as I'm concerned. For Garner, this was not a petty jab. It was an honest critique from one professional about another. He had watched McQueen closely during the filming of The Great Escape, seen the tantrums, the sulking, and the constant demand for more screen time. To him, it was the behavior of a man deeply insecure about his place in the Hollywood hierarchy. Even McQueen's then-wife, Neely Adams, confided in Garner that her husband struggled with jealousy, paranoia, and suspicions of infidelity that had no basis, in fact. Garner contrasted McQueen's limitations with the talents of true actors he respected, like Marlon Brando. Even if Brando could be difficult, his artistry was undeniable. McQueen, by comparison, seemed to be hiding behind an image, one that audiences adored, but fellow performers recognized as hollow. It was a harsh assessment, but one that echoed the sentiments of others. Paul Newman, who co-starred with McQueen in The Towering Inferno in 1974, famously dismissed him with a single expletive, calling him an a-hole for constantly competing over lines and billing. And yet, for all his frustrations, Garner never claimed to hate McQueen. He understood that the insecurities driving him were deeply rooted, and he treated him less like a rival and more like a troubled younger brother. They even remained friends, bound by a strange mutual respect. In the years before his death from cancer in 1980, McQueen reached out to old colleagues, including Yul Brynner, to ask forgiveness for his behavior. Garner never carried a grudge, but the truth, once spoken, was impossible to take back. The Rockford years and Garner's own struggles. While the shadow of Steve McQueen lingered in Hollywood gossip, James Garner was building a legacy of his own. In 1974, he stepped into the role that would define his career, Jim Rockford in The Rockford Files. Created by Roy Huggins and Stephen J. Cannell, the series was designed as a modern-day spin on the Maverick spirit, a down-on-his-luck private investigator living in a modest trailer by the beach. Rockford wasn't invincible or glamorous. He was broke, often conned, sometimes beaten up, but always clever enough to survive. Audiences loved him for it because he felt like one of them. The show was a massive success, winning Garner an Emmy and cementing him as one of television's most beloved leading men. But behind the charm, the role was destroying his body. Garner insisted on doing most of his own stunts, especially the car chases that became the show's trademark. He had already developed a passion for cars while filming the 1966 racing epic Grand Prix, and he poured that enthusiasm into Rockford's iconic gold Pontiac Firebird. But the endless crashes, fights, and physical demands left lasting damage. His knees and back deteriorated season after season. Doctors warned him to slow down, but Garner pushed on, unwilling to compromise the authenticity that made the show work. By 1980, the toll was too great. The Rockford Files ended not just because of costs, but because Garner's body couldn't take it anymore. Yet his struggles didn't end there. For years, he battled Universal Studios in court, accusing them of cheating him out of profits from the show. The fight dragged on for 8 years before he finally won a settlement, though the exact amount was kept secret. It was a victory, but it came at a personal cost. Stress, bitterness, and the sense that Hollywood executives cared more about profit than people. His health continued to decline in later years. He underwent open-heart surgery in 1988, and in 2008 he suffered a severe stroke that slowed him down permanently. But through it all, Garner's reputation as one of Hollywood's most genuine and respected figures endured. He was admired not just for his roles, but for his loyalty. He remained married to his wife Lois Clark for nearly 6 decades, a rarity in a business known for broken relationships. The final years, and Garner's legacy. By the time James Garner reached his later years, the public saw him as a symbol of grace and decency in a business often dominated by ego and scandal. But behind that polished reputation were decades of pain and struggle, scars both physical and emotional. His body bore the price of doing his own stunts, from chronic knee and back injuries to the lingering effects of his open-heart surgery. His stroke in 2008 slowed him further, and by then he had already endured years of surgeries, sinus infections, and hospital visits. Still, he never complained. Garner faced his health the same way he faced the studios, with grit, determination, and a dry sense of humor that never left him. His personal life remained far more stable than most of his peers. Married to Lois Clark since 1956, he avoided the scandals that destroyed many Hollywood marriages. Together they raised 2 daughters, and despite Garner's demanding career, family remained at the center of his life. It was this grounding that perhaps made him so different from Steve McQueen. Where McQueen was restless, insecure, and constantly chasing approval, Garner sought peace and stability, choosing honesty over image. Even in his later reflections, Garner never softened his assessment of McQueen. To him, the younger actor represented both the best and worst of Hollywood, immensely talented at capturing audience attention, yet hollow when stripped of his cultivated cool. "That's the kiss of death as far as I'm concerned," Garner said of McQueen's reliance on persona. It was a critique that carried more weight coming from a man who had fought for integrity his entire life. On July 19, 2014, James Garner passed away at the age of 86 from a heart attack. The news hit fans hard, not because it was unexpected, his health had been failing for years, but because it marked the end of an era. He had been there for decades, a familiar face on television and film, a steady presence in a changing world. His loss left a void, not just in Hollywood, but in the hearts of audiences who had grown up with him. Looking back, Garner's career was a study in contrasts. He was a man who smiled easily but carried the weight of trauma from childhood. He played charming heroes on screen but lived with constant physical pain. And though he rarely spoke ill of others, when he did, when he finally broke his silence about Steve McQueen, his words cut through decades of myth-making to reveal a harsher truth. It was a final reminder that behind the glamour of Hollywood, even the brightest stars are deeply human, flawed, and fragile. James Garner's honesty pulled back the curtain on Steve McQueen in a way few others dared. But what do you think? Was McQueen truly just a movie star playing himself? Or was he a misunderstood actor caught in his own insecurities? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more untold Hollywood stories.